she'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift. Between Dreams and Shadows, it began with a scent faint but sharp, like burnt lavender mixed with dust. Avery noticed it the first night she stayed at her late grandmother's cottage, a small, time-worn structure nestled at the edge of a forest where no paths led. A single road curved inward, like a forgotten vein leading to the hollow. The cottage itself was a storybook remnant. Wood panels warped from moisture, windows thick with grime, and the surrounding trees leaned unnaturally inward, as if eavesdropping. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. No creaking floors, no night insects beyond the walls. The stillness was suffocating. Avery had arrived to sort through her grandmother's belongings. The woman had passed away in her sleep, alone, the body discovered weeks after. Everyone in the village kept their distance from the cottage, offering condolences in hushed voices. Eyes not quite meeting Avery's. She didn't ask why. On the first night, Avery set her sleeping bag near the fireplace. She didn't trust the dusty beds, not yet. The air was dense with old secrets, but she was tired exhaustion enough to drown discomfort. As she dimmed the last lamp, darkness swelled, like a thick curtain. The silence pressed in. No owls, no wind, just her own breath, slow and oddly loud. Then came the feeling, a prickling at the nape of her neck, subtle, like the memory of a touch. Her heartbeat quickened. She stared into the void of the darkened hallway beyond the living room. Nothing moved, yet the air shifted. There was nothing to fear, she told herself. Nothing there, but the stillness had changed. She felt it without understanding how. A presence beneath perception. Something was waiting. She closed her eyes to sleep, but the unease settled beside her like a second pillow. The second night brought movement. Avery woke up before dawn, unsure what had stirred her. The cottage remained hushed, blanketed in a strange quiet that somehow felt louder than sound. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, the floorboards groaning beneath her melee. Something natural, but something was wrong. The wooden chair by the fireplace was turned ever so slightly facing her. She hadn't moved it. She was certain she'd placed her bag beside it the day before, and it had been facing the hearth like the rest of the room's furniture. Now, its slight angle felt accusatory, a detail so small it could have been dismissed, but wasn't. Trying to rationalize it, Avery blamed herself. Maybe she bumped it in the dark. Maybe the floor had shifted. Still, when she stepped closer to straighten it, the sensation returned. That silent pressure on her back, as though her movements were being watched. Measured. She checked the windows. Still locked, curtains drawn. No sign of forced entry. Later that day, while sorting through her grandmother's belongings in the upstairs attic room, she found an old photo album. Most of the pictures were black and white, featuring unfamiliar faces in stiff poses, except one. A photo of the living room, the same chair, the same fireplace. But in the background, barely visible, was a shadow. Not a person. A distortion. It stretched taller than any human, vaguely humanoid, with jagged edges that bled into the wallpaper behind it. The figure stood exactly where the chair was now angled, toward the viewer, toward the lens. That night, the wind began howling, except it wasn't outside, came from inside the walls. Avery stood frozen as the sound circled the room in slow, deliberate loops. It was faint but purposeful, as if it knew she was listening. The scent returned, stronger, now burnt, lavender and dust. Her grandmother's perfume, twisted by rot. Then the hallway light flickered, and the shadows beneath the door stretched long, stretching toward her like fingers made of ink. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the fire, watching. The chair watched back. By the third night, Avery had stopped pretending she was alone. Sleep became a memory. Her eyes, red and stinging, blinked slowly in the candlelight as she sat hunched in the corner of the living room. She kept the lights on now, but the house had other ideas. The bulbs flickered even when untouched. Some nights, they hummed. That night, the humming changed. It wasn't the low mechanical buzz of faulty wiring. No, this had a rhythm, a breath. It rose and fell in irregular pulses, like someone whispering just beyond comprehension. The source was impossible to pinpoint. One moment, it came from the hallway. The next, from beneath the floorboards. Then directly behind her. Avery didn't turn around. The fireplace crackled once loud. Too loud, and the humming ceased, replaced by silence that rang in her ears. Her hands trembled as she lit another candle. The match flared, and, in the brief moment before the flame took hold, she heard it. A voice. Not loud, not even distinct. Just syllables, wet and slurred, as if spoken through a mouth that hadn't been used in decades. She froze, holding her breath again, just at the edge of hearing. Male. Is. Th. The candle slipped from her fingers and went out. In the sudden dark, Avery dared to whisper, "Hello." Silence responded. Then came a sound she couldn't explain. Scraping dot from the ceiling. It dragged from one end of the cottage to the other slow, like something heavy with too many limbs. She stared upward. The attic. The place where she found the photograph. The air grew cold, breath visible, and the scent intensified, burnt lavender. Almost sweet now, cloying. She stumbled to her feet and grabbed the flashlight from her pack, flicking it on with shaking hands. It blinked, once, twice, then steadied. The scraping stopped. She aimed the beam upward, toward the ceiling, willing herself to move, to act. But as she stepped toward the attic stairs, the light went out, and in the pitch black, something whispered again. Not from the attic. This time, from inside the room, right next to her ear. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The voice, if it could be called, that had no breath, no body, no warmth. It was simply there, vibrating against her ear like a memory forced into sound. Avery stood frozen, her limbs useless. The flashlight rolled on the floor, flickering once as if laughing, then went dark again. The shadows in the room grew thicker, textured, like folds of cloth sliding over the walls. That feeling, the awareness, returned stronger now. A gaze, cold, precise, and utterly inhuman. Not like someone watching her from a window. It was inside her space, inside her mind, like the house itself was staring. She turned slowly, barely able to draw breath. Nothing, no shape, no face, but every inch of her skin told her something was in the room. The air had weight. It pressed against her like a tide, and then the small things began to move. A pencil rolled across the table on its own. The chair by the fireplace slowly turned back to face the hearth. One by one, the cabinet doors in the kitchen creaked open, and behind her, the floor groaned under a step. She wheeled around, heart hammering. Nothing again. just the faint scent, and the humming, returning softly, like a lullaby heard underwater. Avery backed into the corner near the window. She could see her breath fogging the glass, her reflection pale and wide-eyed. But as she stared, she saw something in the reflection she hadn't felt, something next to her. A figure, no face, no details, just a hollow shape, darker than the darkness around it. She spun. Flashlight raised, gone. She turned back to the window now, only her reflection. And yet, the candle on the table had moved. It now sat beside her sleeping bag, deliberately placed, almost, thoughtfully. That night, she didn't try to sleep. She sat, knees to her chest, whispering to herself, just to fill the silence, just to keep whatever was with her from answering again. By dawn, something had shifted in her. She was no longer alone. She knew that now, and worse, whatever it was, it didn't want her to leave. Avery awoke to birdsong. It was the first time since arriving that she'd heard any sign of life outside. She stepped to the window, blinking against a strange light. Morning sun filtered through the trees, but it felt unnatural, thin, like light in a dream. The cottage, however, remained cloaked in shadow, indifferent to the day. She almost believed the worst had passed until she looked down. Drawn in the condensation on the inside of the glass was a handprint, small, childlike, not hers, and beside it, a symbol, a spiral, broken in one corner, surrounded by dots, etched not with a finger, but as though burned into the fog itself. That was the first message. The second came in the attic. Compelled by dread more than curiosity, she climbed the stairs with cautious steps, each one echoing too loudly. At the top, the air was cold and metallic. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight as she pushed open the old trunk where she'd found the photo album. Inside now was something new, an old cassette recorder, powered and humming faintly, though the tape inside was brittle with age. Someone had rewound it to the beginning. She hesitated, then pressed play. They said it needs a witness. That's all. Just someone who listens. I didn't listen. I tried to ignore it. Tried to forget what she told me when I was a girl. The voice was her grandmother's. It doesn't come every night. It waits. Waits for you to stop pretending. If you hear it breathing, it already knows your name. A sharp click ended the recording. Avery sat frozen, the flashlight flickering. In her lap then, something tapped. Not the attic door. Not the floor dot from inside the walls. A slow, steady rhythm tap. Tap taps, if trying to get her attention, or warn her. She ran her fingers along the wood and found, near the floorboard seam, a small cavity. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper. On it, written in jagged pencil, "Do not sleep in the same place twice." Beneath the message was the same symbol from the window, a broken spiral, a pattern, not random. Avery looked around the attic, suddenly aware that everything in this house, the moved objects, the humming, the chair, all of it was positioning her, guiding her, or trapping her. That night, she laid her sleeping bag in the kitchen, far from the fireplace. She didn't sleep. She didn't dare. Not after understanding what the silence really was. It wasn't emptiness, it was preparation. That evening, the air in the cottage turned heavy, not with warmth or weather, but with intention. Every sound was too sharp, every silence too thick. It felt as though the house had inhaled and was waiting, holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do. Avery stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by open drawers and the silent hum of old appliances. Her mind buzzed with fragments, her grandmother's voice, the spirals, the warning not to sleep in the same place twice. She hadn't, but something in her knew the rules weren't meant to protect her. They were meant to delay what was inevitable. She walked the rooms, flashlight in hand, her eyes darting to every object that had moved. The candle now in the cupboard. The chair turned again toward the hallway. The photograph now missing from the album. The cottage was rearranging itself, but for what? The answer came not with a whisper, but with a knock. 3 sharp knocks. On the inside of the front door, Avery froze. There was no one outside. The knocks came, again, not begging, not threatening, summoning. She stepped toward the door with deliberate caution. Her hand hovered over the knob, then paused. No, that was exactly what it wanted. Instead, she turned to the mirror in the hallways, something she'd avoided until now. It had been covered with a yellow cloth when she arrived. Something in her had known not to remove it. Now, it was uncovered, and the reflection did not match reality. She stared. The hallway behind her in the mirror was longer, deeper, lined with doors that didn't exist in the real cottage. In the mirror, the light behind her was pulsing like a heartbeat, and a shape stood at the far end of that impossible hallway, just watching. Her own reflection turned its head slowly toward her, even though she hadn't moved, and smiled. Avery stumbled back, heart thundering, the mirror untouched, her breath fast and shallow. She understood now. It wasn't the house that was haunted, it was her perception. Reality itself was shifting. The question wasn't, is this real? It was, has it always been real, and I've only just begun to see it? The knocks stopped, and then came the voice from the tape recorder again, but it wasn't playing. Sleep isn't an escape, Avery. It's an invitation. The final night came without a sunset. Darkness simply fell, like a heavy curtain dropped too early. One moment the sky outside the windows was a bruised dusk. The next, ink black, starless, dead. Avery checked the clock. It had stopped at 6:13. No ticking, no hum. Time had ceased to matter. She felt it then. The boundary between inside and out had collapsed. The cottage was no longer shelter. It was the center of it. The atmosphere had changed again. No more subtle shifts, no more hints. Now everything in the house breathed. The walls pulsed faintly. The doors shivered in their frames, and the humming was now a chant, low, layered voices, incomprehensible, and not from any mouth she'd ever known. They came from beneath the floor, from the walls, and most horribly from inside her own head. The cadence wrapped around her thoughts, folding her fears into rhythm. She stumbled toward the fireplace. The chair was gone in. Its place was the mirror. She hadn't moved it. Her reflection stood there, perfectly still, even though her body trembled. It no longer mirrored her movements. It simply watched, hands folded calmly in its lap on the chair. She blinked. It blinked after dot. Behind her reflection, the shadow returned. The tall, jagged figure. Its limbs swam like smoke, and it leaned closer. Not to harm Herb, to reveal itself. For the first time, she understood its form. Not a ghost, not a demon, not even a presence. It was attention. Pure, suffocating awareness given shape. A watching that could not stop. Its face or what passed for one folded from folds of dark. There were no eyes, no mouth, just an impression of her own fear reflected in alien geometry. It leaned close to her, Miracell, and whispered into her ear. Her reflection smiled again, then turned its head, slowly, deliberately, to look directly at her, breaking the invisible law between mirror and reality. Avery screamed and stumbled back, tripping over her bag and falling hard onto the wooden floor. The boards beneath her flexed, gave bait, and then cracked. She fell, down into nothing. Silence swallowed her as the air rushed past, but she never landed, because there was no floor, no end, just layers of dark, each one humming louder, each one watching, until she didn't know if she was falling or being lowered. When Avery opened her eyes, the cottage was gone, or maybe it wasn't. She stood in a space that felt like the cottage, but everything was wrong. The walls had no texture, the corners didn't align, and the shadows moved independently of any light. The humming continued, but now it pulsed with her heartbeat, no longer separate from her, but inside her. She tried to speak, to cry out, but sound no longer worked the same. Her voice came out after her lips moved, echoing with a delay, warped, like an old tape played backward. "Hello?" she asked. "Hell? Oh," came the answer, from everywhere but her mouth. In front of her, a door stood crooked on a frame made of rotted bone. There was no handle, only the spiral, the broken spiral. Her hand moved on its own, as her fingers traced the shape. The spiral turned beneath her skin, rotating without friction, without consent. The door creaked open, not with sound, but with a sensation of being uninvited. Inside, she saw her room, not the cottage, her apartment. She stood on the threshold, watching her own empty bed, her books stacked neatly, her cup of tea still steaming on the desk, and sitting on the bed was her reflection. Not in a mirror this time. In the flesh, it looked up slowly, and she realized it wasn't a copy, it was her. But this version had never gone to the cottage. This Avery had stayed home, had kept living, and it was afraid of her, because the real Avery had seen too much, had been touched by something that didn't leave. She tried to speak again, to warn her other self, to tell her to leave, to forget, but her voice came out as that same distant hum, a chorus layered over itself. The other Avery stared, frozen, then slowly reached for the cup of tea she was about to drink, and in that moment, Avery understood. It wasn't just the cottage, it wasn't a curse, it was a pattern, something that passes from perception to perception, from one moment of vulnerability to another, from dream to waking life, a warning that never arrives in time. She tried to scream, but no sound came, because fear like this doesn't end, it transfers. Could you sleep after hearing this? What do you think really happened? Was Avery trapped, replaced, or set free in the most terrifying way imaginable? Let me know in the comments and, if you dare, choose another story to explore before bed, because not every sleep story comes with a warning. Some come after.